Hi everyone. We're just going to start in just a sec as people are trickling in. We're seeing the numbers of participants increasing really quickly, but hopefully you're able to hear our sound now. And I might just get started now because we're 6:02 and we've got lots of people coming in. So just to firstly say welcome, thank you for joining us. I think it will be a really exciting webinar tonight, and we're going to be stepping through this new report that we're very proud of, Seize the Decade, which is a practical plan, and it spells out how we're going to cut pollution by 75% this decade. We have, as you know, put out lots of reports about why that target is absolutely critical, but this is about the plan to get there. So if you don't know me, I'm Amanda McKenzie. I'm the CEO of the Climate Council. And so before we get started, I wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that we're meeting on. For me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging, acknowledge any Indigenous people on the call today, and acknowledge that the leaders, First Nations leaders here and around the world, have been absolutely at the forefront of the climate crisis. Their leadership has been critical in many different facets, and acknowledge that leadership and how important it has been, and ask you to share where you are from in the chat so we get a sense of where everyone is joining from. So as you may know, in my role, I speak to a lot of different people about climate change, and one question always comes up: is it really possible to slash climate pollution as fast as we need to avoid the worst impacts of the climate crisis? And if so, how do we do it? So you'll be relieved to hear that we know how to do it. And we have now done that research in a lot of detail. We've spent the last year doing a very detailed analysis, as well as a range of different research pieces to allow us to get a view of the whole of the economy, how we can slash climate pollution, provide a macro roadmap of how to do that across the economy, as well as a detailed policy gallery for decision makers at state, federal, local levels to then implement that roadmap. So the plan's called Seize the Decade. You might have seen it in the media, in emails from us, and we really encourage you to download the report, have a look at it. But ultimately, it shows how Australia can cut pollution 3 times faster than what the federal government is now proposing and is underway in doing. So one thing that's a really important thing to take away, if you take away nothing else from tonight, it's that there has been a big turnaround in Australia in the last 2 years. The federal government has been introducing a range of different pieces of legislation and funding that is transforming the Australian economy. And that builds on work from state governments, from local governments, business and households. It means that Australia is now powered 40% from renewable energy. We have 3.5 million homes with solar panels. So we are actually on this journey together. We're not at the starting blocks, we're firmly down the pathway. And what is required now is to absolutely increase the pace and the scale of what we have already been doing. This is about expanding our energy system, powering it with renewable power, and doing a whole range of other things across each of our sectors, proven solutions that are already available to slash pollution. So the message is that this is a great opportunity for us to protect our kids, their future, but it's also about providing the opportunities for the Australian economy into the future that leads to jobs and industries that allow communities to thrive in an ongoing way. So we'll take a look at the report, and then we'll jump into a panel discussion with some of the experts that have been involved in the report. So I'd like to thank Dr. Tim Nelson, Dinah Arndt, and Dr. Jen Rayner for joining us tonight and sharing their insights. So Tim and Jen have been involved in crafting the report, and Jen will do a presentation to walk us through that. And then Tim has an energy background. I'll get into that later, but Dinah is the head of comms. So she's done a whole lot of research in the comms of this. How do we communicate it and bring the community along? So she'll go into some of that. We won't have a huge amount of time for Q&A off the cuff tonight. We have received a whole lot of questions in advance that we've peppered through the program to try and represent the types of questions that have been coming through. But we've also got 2 of our fabulous researchers Annetta Zhu, who's our Solutions Research Director, and Quantitative Analyst Ben McLeod, who will be online furiously answering additional questions that are coming up. So please feel free to drop in questions there too in the Q&A function. So now we'll jump into the presentation with Jen, who's one of the key authors on the report. And Jen, you may know from other webinars and from the work that we've been doing, you've probably seen her in the media. She's our Head of Policy and Advocacy with a strong background in working at all levels of government. And she's a very impressive person, and she'll give us the overview of what this report is all about. So go for it, Jen.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And thank you everyone for being with us tonight. We always feel so excited and so buoyed when we have the chance to present Climate Council's new work to all of you in our community, because this is your work. This is the work that your support funds and delivers. So we really appreciate you being here tonight to hear about it. And we want to say thank you up front for what your support has allowed us to do. As Amanda said, Climate Council has a plan. And we're very excited about this plan because for the first time, we can be really clear it is going to take to cut climate pollution. We have a plan that will allow us to cut climate pollution 75% by 2030, which puts us on track for that science-aligned fair share target of net zero by 2035. And it's a plan that allows us to do things to cut climate pollution right across our economy in a way that we haven't necessarily had a clear line of sight to before. It builds on the existing momentum, which is already underway around Australia. So as Amanda says, more than 40% of the power in our grid today is already coming from clean renewables. Over 3 million homes have already taken power into their own hands and put solar on the roof. And that means that we can do so much more now because of the progress that we have started to make, but also the ideas that Climate Council is ready to catalyse. So what you can see on the screen in front of you there is the main slices of where we think the cuts to climate pollution can come from. And we've taken the federal government's emissions projections as our basis, where they think we're going to get to by 2030, which are the pink slices that you can see there. But then we have looked further and wider across the economy to understand where there is still more that we can do. And I'll speak briefly tonight about the big pieces of that puzzle and what that's going to take. But I think it's really important to what you can see here that there's a lot more potential out there than is currently being planned for under government policy and effort. And so at Climate Council, we really see our role as encouraging governments to go further, to do more, to keep cutting further and faster, but also catalysts of ideas to show them and explain to them where those can actually come from. You're probably aware, because you've been following our work, that clean electricity is the absolute foundation of decarbonising our economy. We need to electrify absolutely everything we can with clean renewables, our homes, our businesses, transport and industry. And what that means is we need a much bigger grid than the one we have today, but also a much bigger grid than the one that governments are currently planning to build. So at the end of this decade, we need to be powering ourselves almost entirely with clean wind, solar, backed up by batteries and pumped hydro. And we need the grid to be about 220 gigawatts in size, which is a big step up from where we are today. But importantly, one of the key ways that we can actually get there is to put much more solar on our roofs, on our homes, on our businesses, and on industry. This plan has identified that we can put solar on about 4 million more homes around Australia, which would more than double the number of households that do have power in their own hands. And we can back that up with about 2 million households and nearly 5,000 community batteries. And that will put power much closer to where people are using it around the country, also helping Australians to manage their cost of living and also actually have control of their own energy needs. If we can do that, you can see on the slide here that we're actually able to close all coal-fired power generators by 2030, which is 8 years earlier than the market operator, the Australian Energy Market Operator, thinks is going to be the case. And so that would be a huge step forward in cutting harmful climate pollution and also cleaning up our air, making our energy system more resilient and more affordable for Australians. And so if we can build this really big grid with much more rooftop solar, much more wind, much more storage and batteries than we have today, then we'll be really set up not just to decarbonize our whole economy to its full potential, but we'll have also started laying the foundations for the future clean industries that we want to keep powering Australia's prosperity. You probably saw today the Prime Minister making a pretty big announcement about his Made in Australia Act, which is all about building clean industries to replace our dirty fossil fuel exports and keep powering the next generation of Australian prosperity. But we're only going to be able to do that if we have an energy system, a clean energy system that is big enough to support it. So this is the absolute key. Once we have all of that clean electricity in the system, we can also then really start getting fossil fuels out of other parts of our economy very quickly. So there's about fundamentally two places where we use fossil fuels in industry in Australia today. One is as a heat source and a fuel, and the other one is as a feedstock and a high temperature heat source for some manufacturing processes. Our work shows there is heaps that industry can do, mining and manufacturing in particular, to phase out the use of coal, oil and gas as a heat source and a fuel. That looks like manufacturers electrifying their plants. It looks like big mining companies electrifying their fleets. And if we can take those practical steps now with technologies that are already available to them, we can slash our use of fossil fuels in industry by really big amounts, as you can see on the screen there. What that will mean is that we will need much less of those fossil fuels, and we can actually also stop approving new coal mines so that we can deal with some of the fugitive emissions which are coming from those facilities, which are adding to our climate woes here in Australia, as well as producing more fossil pollution when that coal is burned overseas. It's really important to understand that there's a lot that industry can do now, because often people get quite caught up in thinking that there are parts of industry that are hard to abate. And while that's certainly true, there is also a lot of potential, a lot of things that industry can do now and that our report steps through, which would allow industry to start down the path of cutting its climate pollution this decade and then do more in the time to come. You would know if you've been following our work for a little while that Climate Council is really focused on shared, active and electric transport, because unfortunately transport is a big share of Australia's climate pollution and it's still rising. So we haven't yet got the policies and plans in place to bend that curve and really slash pollution from our cars. What this work identifies is that we can shift about 30% of passenger kilometres that we currently take with our cars to shared and active modes. That means riding and walking more, but also using public transport and shared fleets like electrified Uber or rideshare, or even, I'm here in the ACT, even e-scooters is another opportunity to get around differently. But we need to be enabling and encouraging Australians to use those shared and active options more often by giving them more choice. Because at the moment, it is very hard for a lot of Australians around our biggest cities. If you live in our suburbs, you live on the outer edges of our cities, it's really hard for Australians to move around other than by car. So we need a mix of solutions that are going to get people where they need to go cleanly and affordably. And that means really ramping up the availability of those alternative shared and active services and infrastructure, particularly for people in our big cities where they would like to use them more, but they just don't have them available today. Climate Council has been really thinking hard with this work about what needs to happen in agriculture and our land sector, because we do know that in agriculture, the solutions are not as clear-cut in a technology sense as they are for something like the energy system, for industry or for transport. So what we have said in this report is we need to do much more research and development on the good scalable solutions that are going to cut climate pollution in the agriculture sector. There's some really promising emerging opportunities from things like feed additives for our cattle, fertilizers for the land, and those are technologies which are showing real promise, but we're going to need to do more work on that this decade to get to a point where we know exactly what the right solutions for agriculture are going to be. At the same time, our land sector is already a sink of climate pollution because the trees and plants and bushes around us can absorb that carbon as they're growing. But it's not as much of a sink as it could be because we are still engaging in practices like native forest logging and land clearing, which are not only incredibly harmful to our biodiversity, but also mean that we are releasing more climate pollution up into the atmosphere. So what we've suggested in this report is that we need to get agriculture emissions as low as possible. And then we also need to make our land sector as much of a sink as it can possibly be, so that those two things are effectively cancelling each other out and forming a closed loop that goes to net negative emissions over time, so that we can also start dealing with the hangover of climate pollution that is still in our atmosphere from all of these years up until now. An important implication of that, though, is that land-based offsets are not going to be available at scale for anything that has a fossil fuel source of climate pollution. And so with this work, we're really drawing a clear line in the sand that you would have seen us talk about elsewhere from a science perspective, but really also saying from a policy perspective, land-based offsets are not a solution to fossil fuel climate pollution. The only genuine and permanent solution for any climate pollution that comes from fossil fuels is to phase down and then out as rapidly as possible the use of those fossil fuels and replace them with clean energy alternatives. If you are a fan of our work in building electrification, you would know how excited we are about the possibilities of electrified and efficient buildings. And Climate Council has done quite a lot of work on this over the last 12 or 18 months because it's actually a fantastic 2-for-1 deal for Australians. If we can electrify our homes, so get off gas for our heating, our cooking, our hot water heating, and also make them more efficient by improving how we build, then not only are we slashing climate pollution from our built environment, but we're also giving Aussies homes that are both cheaper to run and much more comfortable and safe to live in. So this idea of making our built environment much more electric and efficient is a really simple, really practical way that we can give people better homes to live in and more comfortable homes to live in, while also really tackling climate pollution. And the technologies and the solutions that we need for this are absolutely all here. They're all in train. I know if you're a member of our climate community, you've probably already taken some of these steps in your own home, because we hear so often from people who have electrified, who have started to build more efficient homes and share with us the benefits that has brought for them. And we always really love hearing those updates from you. I've talked really briefly there about the big sets of opportunities that there are to cut climate pollution across our economy and how we've stepped through that in the report. What we've also done with this work is to identify a really broad range of policies for all levels of government, federal government, state government, and local governments around the country, to put this into effect. Because we know that in this moment, this wonderful moment of opportunity that we have in front of us, with governments at all levels who are listening, who are thinking hard about climate, and who are wanting to get more done, the opportunity is not just to set out the objective, but it's to map the path for how we get there. And so we've outlined a lot of different policies that we will now be using as our platform over the next 12 to 18 months, particularly as we head into the next federal election, where we really want to get more done in the next term of federal government and hopefully the one after that. But we can be really clear now and really specific about what it looks like to do more in climate action in Australia, building on the progress that's already been made. And we really are excited to be able to share with you what those ideas are in the report, and you can go online and look through them, because we're going to need everybody coming together across the community, speaking up and speaking out about what those opportunities are, so that we can really force governments to listen and put these things on their agenda for the next term of federal government.
Mm.
I'll just close by pointing out that we really want this piece of work to signal a new chapter for Australian climate action, a new story about how we're going to go forward together. And there's 3 parts to that. The first is that this is a plan that everyone has a part in. So we know now that it is possible to build a fairer, cleaner energy system, and we know that it will be something we all need to play a role in. People in our cities and our suburbs will put solar on their roof and a battery in their community. Our biggest industry and business partners can also do the same. And people in our regions will host the large-scale renewables, wind, solar, batteries that will help provide the really diverse and really resilient grid that we need to build now. So at the moment, sometimes the conversation feels a little bit too much us and them, people in the regions doing something so that people in the cities can benefit. The story that we're explaining here is that this is something we're all going to build together and that all Australians can be part of. We're also being really clear with this work what real solutions are and what is going to get us to the deep and permanent cuts to climate pollution that we need. And that means ending burning coal, oil, and gas wherever that is possible. When we're able to show that we can do this now with technologies that we already have available by scaling up those clean energy alternatives, what it means is that we can say really clearly, enough with the waiting, enough with the excuses for delay. We have the technology, we have the opportunities, we know what they are, let's get on with it. And anything which is not helping us genuinely and permanently phase out fossil fuels is not helping us deal with our climate challenge. And the final piece is particularly resonant today when the Prime Minister, as I say, has been out talking about what his government wants to do to help build future clean industries in Australia, that this is really a platform for Australia's next era of prosperity. We need to lay the foundations now for the clean energy and clean industries that are going to keep powering Australia for decades to come, because we want our kids to have the same opportunities for great jobs, really rewarding and really secure lives that we have enjoyed, and we can do that if we get on with the job now. So thanks again for the opportunity to talk with you about this evening, and thank you to my amazing team who are online, who've done so much blood, sweat and tears on this work over the last year. It's been really exciting to put together, and we look forward to chatting a bit more with you about it this evening.
Thanks so much, Jen. That was an excellent whistle-stop tour of the Australian economy and what needs to be done. The report itself has a huge amount of detail in it. As I said at the start, it's involved a whole lot of modelling work as well as research. The way that it's structured is looking at each of the sectors of the economy, and then we have a policy gallery. So there was a lot of questions coming up about, well, what does it take to get this plan into action? The policy gallery details policies for local, state, federal government, 38 policies in total. And it won't surprise you to hear that, a year before, maybe a year before the federal election, we have an agenda now of the things that we will be putting to government. We think that if the government says that, it's on track to get to what they say their target is of 43% reduction by the end of this decade, there is then far more that can be done in the next 2 terms before 2030. So seize the decade is all about saying there is far more that you can do in the next 2 terms to build on what has already occurred. There's a lot of questions coming through about coal and gas and the government continuing to approve coal and gas and our exports. We'll definitely deal with that in the discussion. Jen will talk further about the actions that will be taken. There's a few questions coming through about, did we look at whether the economy can actually be powered with renewables? And just to reassure you, we've done a power system analysis in this. So as and hopefully that will be by 2030, our system is powered 94% renewables by 2030. It absolutely can happen and we can get it there. There will be a discussion. We won't go as much into Australia in the world, although that has come up a bit, but to say that other than the exports, which we will explore, but the Climate Council's philosophy is that if we can get Australia elevating the work that we do here, if we can get our domestic emissions under control and slash our climate pollution dramatically, it enhances our credibility globally to be a leader. We haven't been a leader in this space in the decades prior. That is the opportunity, is if we can slash our emissions. And it also would be the foundation for an economy that can be that can have an export industry that is not fossil fuels. There can be a whole range of clean things that we are exporting to the world that would replace fossil fuels, but we will obviously need to be bringing fossil fuel exports out of the economy earlier than that. So there are other things that will need to replace fossil fuel exports as well. So that's just a few answers to questions that are coming through. But there is, our experts will go into a lot more depth, and Ben and Annette are also answering questions on the Q&A at the same time. So Jay is now going to share a little video that we've prepared that helps to explain what this is all about in layman's terms, and something that we are promoting pretty heavily on social media to take this message to a broad audience.
In 2035, I will be 29.
I'll be 22.
I'm going to be 28.
Oh, wow.
I'm probably gonna be trying to be a geologist.
I want to be a YouTuber.
I want to be a basketball player in America for the WNBA.
I guess I just want a future I can look forward to.
Hotter temperatures, frequent bushfires and intense cyclones. And it's down to climate change.
2023 was the hottest year ever. The thought of my home becoming unlivable makes me scared,
Angry.
And a little bit sad.
Some adults say it's impossible to cut climate pollution any faster.
but that's not true.
Everything we do now matters.
We can put more solar on top of our homes and buildings.
We can access more sun, more wind, and store more power.
We can build batteries, ride electric cars, bikes, and buses.
The solutions are already here. Now all we need is you.
The Climate Council has a plan to cut climate pollution by 75% this decade and put us on track to end climate pollution by 2035.
What we need now is our leaders to help seize the decade by cutting climate pollution further and faster.
To create a better, safer future.
For us. For all of us.
Your choices today will define the futures of every young Australian.
So,
Are you with us?
I hope you enjoyed that. We think it's a really powerful piece of communications. It does really get me tearing up a little bit each time I see it. Well, I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and the Climate Council community for supporting the Climate Council. As you probably know, we're an independent organisation, so we're funded fully by donations from the public, and that allows us to do this sort of work where we can go and take a deep dive into what it will take to change fundamentally our nation and move us not just from the technical standpoint, but also from the policy and advocacy standpoint, the political standpoint, and then all of the comms. How are we going to communicate and bring people along with us? Being able to do all of that as an independent organisation is something pretty special and is only enabled because we have such an amazing community that's behind us. So I invite you to consider, if you're not already a supporter, to consider making a donation to the Climate Council to fund this sort of work. And particularly we will be the work that we're now going to be focused on is packaging this up for decision makers to try and get greater commitments of all sides of politics before the next federal election, as well as bringing it to all of the state governments. We're bringing it to business leaders today. And yesterday, we were talking to the Insurance Council, to the Clean Energy Finance Corporation. We're talking to a whole range of different peak bodies all across the Australian community, as well as communicating it to the Australian public. So you can make a tax donation at any time if you're interested. So I'll now just turn to our panelists and ask them to pop on their cameras. So joining us is Dr. Tim Nelson. He's one of our climate counsellors and he's a leading energy and environmental economic expert. He's an associate professor at Griffith University Centre for Applied Energy Economics and Policy Research, and he's published in many journals. He's a fantastic contributor to the Climate Council and to the broader public conversation on this issue. Welcome, Tim. And Also joining Jen and Tim is Dinah Arndt. She's our head of strategic communications at the Climate Council. She's been with us for about 7 odd years. She's a former journalist. Has lots of experience in the Australian media industry. She helped set up the Climate Media Centre within the Climate Council, which is like a PR hub for climate. So helping doctors, firefighters, solar installers, farmers speak out about climate change. And more recently, she's really helped the Climate Council augment our communications by doing a whole lot of research into how to move Australians. And she's a fantastic communicator as well. So that's Tim and Dinah. But to kick off the discussion, I might go to you first, Tim. We can see that clean electricity is at the heart of the plan. As an energy expert and climate policy expert, can you tell us a little bit how the energy system can be built up? Is it possible to expand our energy system to that degree and do it so quickly?
Thanks, Amanda, and thanks so much to the Council for producing such an amazing report, because it is one of those great reports that makes very complicated information really digestible. So I can't recommend enough for everyone to read it. I guess the key thing for me is to start with the message of optimism, that the report shows that it is absolutely possible to do it. And if we kind of pause and reflect on what Australia currently has achieved, South Australia in particular has one of the most decarbonised electricity grids of anywhere in the world. It's got great wind resources, great solar resources, and millions of Australians have put their own money where their mouth is already. So 40% of all of the energy that's supplied through what we call the national electricity market, or the East Coast market, 40% of that is already renewable. And a good proportion of that is all of the activity that households have undertaken in taking control of their own energy supply by putting solar on their rooftop. But what the report shows is that 40% is a great start, but we've got a long way to go. We need to get to that 94%, and then we need to get to 100% very quickly after that. And what's the way that we can do that? Well, there's 2 things that really stand out to me. Number one is we just keep empowering homes to do what they've already been doing, which is keep putting more and more solar on the rooftop. And then we also empower the large industry through some of the very positive policy change, Amanda, that you talked about, that's coming out of Canberra, with things like the Capacity Investment Scheme, and in New South Wales, the Energy Roadmap. The state governments of Queensland and Victoria are also doing some great work in this space. So there's enough large-scale renewable resources to power not only our existing electricity consumption, so we can substitute out of coal and gas, but there's also more than enough renewable energy resources for us to decarbonise our transport fleets, to decarbonise all of those other industrial processes that are inherently complicated but have used largely fossil gas, as their industrial feedstock for the last little while. And there's a great opportunity for shifting out of that. So the key things for me are not only do we have the resources, they're world-class resources. Our wind resources and our solar resources are better than anywhere in the world. In fact, I remember I was talking to somebody from Southeast Asia who said, you Australians really are the lucky country. For the 20th century, you had all of this space and all of these resources, and now in the 21st century, you're going to be taking advantage of all of those renewable resources to power Southeast Asia through green energy exports. So what this report shows is we need a bigger system, because we need that system to power transport and a lot of those industrial processes. But we've also got great scope for using that cheap renewable electricity to build out some of those energy exports, which can then help other countries decarbonise and shift away from some of that coal and gas that we're currently exporting.
Thanks, Tim. That was an excellent answer. Jen, going to you now. There's a lot of questions coming through about what does this mean for coal exports and gas exports? What does it mean for the government approving current coal and gas? What do we have to say about that? How does it relate to the plan? And also questions about what action we need from decision makers, which is sort of touching on that we need them to be also making it more difficult for any of these projects to go ahead. Can you give us a little bit of a flavour of what we've been saying about that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Amanda. And thank you for the questions on that, because this is really the heart of what needs to happen in Australia right now. We need all of our decision makers pulling in the direction of growing the good stuff, phasing up renewable energy, helping incentivize more clean transport and making it easier for people to use shared and active transport more often, giving industry the right signals and the right incentives to electrify and use cleaner fuels. And then we need them to stop approving new coal and gas projects and rapidly work to phase out those products. Because at the end of the day, as I said in my presentation, the only way that we can cut harmful climate pollution is to phase out our use of coal and gas. So it actually is that simple. We need to phase up the good stuff, we need to phase down the bad stuff, and then get rid of it. And that starts with our decision makers going all in on this clean energy transition, because at the moment, the federal government's approach in particular has two parts, unfortunately. There is the part about what they're doing in Australia and the good progress and momentum that we're making on starting to decarbonise our own economy, but they are not yet grappling with phasing down and out Australia's fossil fuel exports. So we need to start by ending the approval of those new projects. And one of the really key opportunities that is live in front of us right now is the reform of Australia's national environment law. Climate Council has been doing a lot over the last 12 months in particular to really make the case for why climate must be included in a new national environment law so that it properly protects nature from climate change for the first time. What that will allow us to do, if we can get a really strong national environment law in place, is say a quick, effective yes to the good stuff, the responsibly delivered clean energy and clean industry projects that work for nature, climate, and communities, because we have a law that's set up to do that. And say no to the stuff that is going to cause more climate harm. And that's been a real priority for us here at Climate Council, because that's one of the very practical opportunities that's right in front of us right now. So as Amanda says, we've been out talking to absolutely everybody about this work because we really want decision makers to understand what is possible. So often when we speak to them, what we get are outdated ideas, outdated thinking about things like the role of gas as a transition fuel or how long it's going to be before we can do this thing or another in our economy. And the reality is, as Tim says, things are moving very fast. Technology is changing, markets are changing, opportunities for cutting climate pollution are emerging literally day by day now. And so by providing that up-to-date information and that very leading edge perspective on what is possible, we help it make it more feasible for decision makers to do the right thing.
Thanks, Jen. Dinah, I'll bring you in now. One of our most frequently submitted questions over the years is, what can I do to help? And our member Elle has put it, I want to be able to show my kids that the action I took makes a difference. Dinah, can you talk about the practical ways an individual can control and contribute to reducing climate pollution in a meaningful way?
Yeah, I think all of us feel disempowered at times, I think, and quite pessimistic if we tuning into what's happening when it comes to climate impacts. And if I could share a personal story, I actually had a couple of tradies up on my roof today installing solar, and it felt really good. I actually haven't been in a position to do that before now because I've been a lifetime renter, and there's lots of Australians out there for various reasons that aren't in a position to do that. But what felt sort of good about it was not just the personal benefit and the fact that it was a really tangible thing that I could personally do, but I think it's that feeling of being part of something much bigger. And Tim referenced this earlier, but more than 3 million Australians have solar on their rooftop. So I'm joining a solar army, and I think while I can't speak to every person on the call tonight, as there's many of you, I'm pretty confident that there's something in this plan that each of you can do and may not have thought of as a climate solution, whether that's catching the bus one day instead of dropping the kids off at school in the car, or whether that's thinking about how you can make your house more energy efficient. So I think it's just thinking about those different ways of how we get around, how we power ourselves. And while individual actions may not feel like a big thing, when you think about that extrapolated out to all of us doing more of those things more often, I think that's where the empowerment really lies for us all.
Thanks, Dinah. And we also encourage people to do things within their own life, as well as coming together with others, whether that's contributing to organisations that are doing advocacy work, whether it's contacting your MP, your local government, etc. Having all of our voices heard together will be absolutely critical to complement that work that we all do in our own lives. Tim, I'll go back to you now. Rooftop solar, as Dinah said, is something that's quite practical for most people, or for many people. I wanted to ask you if you can elaborate a little bit on that. Obviously, not every household can get solar for many different reasons, but I wondered if you can tell us a little bit about why that opportunity is an important part of the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. So the great thing about solar on your rooftop is that not only is it environmentally a great outcome from a climate problem perspective, but in addition to that, it saves a lot of money and resources for both the household that does it and society overall. So if you think about it at the moment, a lot of these electrons, you're seeing the electricity generated at a large power station somewhere in regional Australia, and it goes through transmission wires, and then it goes through a distribution system, and it gets to your home. Now, if you can avoid having to build those electricity wires, those transmission wires and those distribution wires to be as big as they currently are, because you can generate and use that electricity on site, you can effectively reduce the cost of how much it costs to build and operate that network. Now, the reason that's so important is that with electric vehicles and other things that we're starting to see kind of turn up in kind of big cities, we're seeing that electrification potentially cause extra electricity demand. So it's really important that we minimize how much we grow electricity demand at unnecessary times. And that's what solar can do. Solar can be stored in batteries. It can avoid the need for some of that transmission and distribution. So not only is it a great outcome for the environment, it really does kind of reduce costs, not just to the household, but the overall system costs, because you can reduce how much of that, that network infrastructure you really need. Now, the caveat to that is we need batteries as well. So, and that's part of what the report shows. It shows that we need significant investment in both community scale batteries, but also large scale utility storage. But if we get that right, it's one of those rare instances in dealing with an environmental issue. We can also potentially reduce the unit cost and therefore the electricity price for everybody. So it's a great outcome in that sense that you're not just kind of achieving a great environmental outcome, you're probably also saving quite a bit of money in the hip pocket as well. I think the other really important thing with solar is that policymakers have to overcome the barrier to renting. When you rent, you really are prohibited from participating in the benefits of solar. And so that's something which governments really do need to turn their attention to, because if we are going to install another 4 or 5 million PV systems on people's roofs, we've got to crack that nut. We really do need to work on how we get a better and more equitable policy framework. So it's not just a transition, it's a just transition.
Jen, just briefly, could you just speak to the policy around putting solar on everyone's roof? We're obviously very focused on certain groups.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we really call out in the report is that there's a lot of Australians for whom it already makes great sense to put solar on your roof and a battery maybe with it as well. And I'm sure that many of you tonight, judging by the chat, have already done that. But there are absolutely communities and cohorts around Australia who will never be able to make that change for themselves. And we've really recommended that governments lean in strongly there to help those people, help those households, and help those communities get this change as well and share in its benefits. So one particular recommendation that we've made in the report is that governments put solar on all the public housing properties that they own around Australia. They're the landlord of those properties. They're the properties that they actually are responsible for. And that is one really practical example of where governments can just lean in and say, you know what, we want more power in the grid. We want more people to have access to the benefits of solar in lowering their power bills and giving them more control. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do that for those people, because that's our shared responsibility to make sure that everyone gets to feel the benefits.
Thanks, Jen. Dinah, there's questions coming through talking about how do we communicate with friends, family, politicians, our workplaces, all those that need to hear that the plan is necessary, it is possible to do this. Can you tell us a little bit about what is persuasive? How can we become strategic communicators ourselves?
Well, there's probably 4 things that I'd call out that if every one of us was out doing, I think would make such a huge difference. The first is tell people there is a plan. when you go out and talk to the community, and that goes right across from people that are highly concerned about climate change to people that have concern, but perhaps it's not their highest priority. Overwhelmingly, people are like, I know it's a problem, but I don't really know what we should do. I don't know what government should do. I don't know what I should do. So I think, as much as possible, underscore that there is a plan, encourage them to really get across the areas that we're talking about that can really make that big difference. The second thing I'd want to pull out is around hope and confidence. And, I mentioned, the difficulty of seeing the climate crisis unfold ongoing, and there's a lot of bad news out there. The news, 24 news media cycle operates on bad news. If it bleeds, it leads, is the unfortunate phrase that news editors have. And so we're all exposed to that. We're all plugged into that. And I think just personally, we all need to have hope and confidence. If you don't have hope and confidence, well, then you're certainly not going to get out there and do anything about it. So I think underscore hope and confidence. And really that comes from pointing to progress that's already being made, and really talking about the things that you've been able to do in your life, and showing people that, hey, it is possible, and come join me. Let's do it together. I think a couple of the really interesting things that came out of our recent research was talking about a solution before you talk about a problem. And the way that I'll explain that is we often, see really concerning things like government's approving new coal and gas mines, and we want to sort of shout like, we've got to stop doing this. We've got to close it and stop it. And that's most of our automatic response, because it's very obvious that we do need to do that. But when you're talking to people that aren't as highly concerned about climate change, they have really legitimate concerns about what that will mean. And when you actually put the solution first, so for in the example of energy, when you say we need much more rooftop solar and we need much more onshore wind, and we need to be building way more big batteries and energy storage so we can close all our remaining coal-fired power stations, the vast majority of people will say, yeah, okay, that makes sense, because we've actually told them we'll have everything in place before we get rid of that thing. And it really reassures people that maybe have those concerns. The last one is a bit of an interesting one, which is around talking about climate pollution. And what I mean by that is shorthand for coal, oil and gas, the pollution that is really driving the climate crisis. But why we use that phrase climate pollution is because it's instantaneously understandable by everyone, and they don't really have to have much prior knowledge to then put all the pieces together, which is climate change is happening, it's harmful, we need to do something about it, it's the pollution that's the problem, and that's what we need to be tackling. And it really does sort of link that thing together, where you don't have to then talk about coal and gas, and you don't then have to talk about how to fix it. But that's the other recommendation that I would make.
Thanks, Dinah. Staying with you, can you tell us about nuclear? This Climate Council has long said that we should not consider nuclear as part of the plan to decarbonise in the Australian context for a whole range of reasons. Obviously, the opposition's put it at the top of their agenda, and there's been a lot of conversation without a huge amount of support for the opposition so far. But can you tell us a little bit about how we're dealing with it?
Yeah, well, I think we've there are a long list of arguments and obvious reasons why nuclear makes no sense in Australia today. And I could give you the list of 100, or I could just tell you the one that I think is the key one, and that is later is too late. I think everyone on this call or webinar would understand that this is the make or break decade. In the 2020s, we can make the most difference. We have the opportunity to make the most difference we can to get this climate crisis under control. So we don't want to miss that opportunity. If we go down the nuclear route, we are looking at a decade minimum before anything occurs. So what we're effectively saying is we're going to throw our hands up, we're going to do nothing, and we're going to let this disaster unfold without any intervention. And I don't think any of us would say that's a reasonable thing to do.
Thanks, Dinah. And Jen, I just wanted to come to you now. There's a few things that have been circulating in particular in the chat that people want to know about. One is, what does it mean our plan say about animal agriculture. The other one is about recycling, particularly solar panels and other things that come from renewable energy, as well as plastics and metals in general. Could you comment on those two pieces of the plan?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Amanda, and thanks for the questions. People clearly know this topic very well because they're touching on some of the interesting and important stuff that really does get crunchy when you start working through what our shift to clean energy is going to look like. On the recycling piece, it is absolutely true that we need to deal with the end-of-life renewable energy infrastructure much better than we currently do today. So people may be aware there is a big wave of end-of-life infrastructure coming from the first set of installations of clean electricity infrastructure in Australia. And so we need to move pretty quickly to put in place the right recycling and sustainability arrangements for that. We've got a policy in the report which recommends that governments lean into that and establish some national producer responsibility requirements so that people who are selling renewable energy infrastructure, whether that's large scale or it's small scale, are including a levy in that, which then tracks through to the end of life recycling of those products. That's needed because otherwise there may not be necessarily fully sustainable markets for the recycling in Australia. So we need government help to get that set up and get that moving so that we can create those end-to-end markets in Australia that see us make much better use of the materials that are in our clean energy infrastructure, because a lot of them can absolutely be used again, and we should be doing that so that we are keeping within that broader planetary boundaries point of using every material that we've got really sustainably. In relation to animal agriculture, I know they've been following the chat there, and there's a lot of discussion about this question around, eating less meat, and that's definitely an opportunity that a lot of Australians are starting to think about and take up for themselves. What that is also balanced against, though, is a rising, middle class in our region, and a lot of people who are only just getting access to the opportunity to eat quite a lot of meat for the first time. And so when we've done our analysis here, there's two trends that are kind of moving against each other. One of potentially some people eating less meat and one of people eating more. And so we haven't necessarily assumed that there's going to be a big reduction in the animal herds that we have in Australia. And so that's why we've talked a lot about the importance of continuing to work out what the good solutions for ag are going to be. Obviously, if we are eating less meat, then there will be less of a need for animal herds that produce climate pollution. And that could be something that is part of where the market goes in the future, but we shouldn't necessarily rely on that as the only solution. We need to really be thinking hard about what other options we have through things like feed additives, through things like selective breeding, and then also through that opportunity that I was talking about there to make sure that our land sector is as much of a sink as possible so that those biogenic emissions, the ones that come from animals and the ones that come from our land sector, can form a closed loop with each other, which effectively balances out.
Thanks, Jen. I now wanted to just ask you as well, Jen, if you can tell us a little bit about how we will try and get action on this plan. There's a lot of comments coming through. What is our advocacy priorities? How do we try and actually get this done?
Absolutely. Well, again, I just want to reiterate how grateful we are for the support that allows us to go and be present in the federal parliament and be out talking to politicians every day, and the work that all of you do as well through our MP actions, through the conversations that you have, through the way that you share our content and our information online, because we need to be really, really loud in telling the story about how Australia can slash climate pollution by 75% this decade, and telling that in the public sphere, as well as telling that directly to decision makers in the way that we do through our advocacy work. There's probably three particular priorities out of Seize the Decade that Climate Council will be doing a lot of work on in the months to come. You'll see a lot from us about what we're calling the Aussie Solar Drive, which is a blanket campaign around all of the opportunities that come with putting more solar on our roofs, and the workforce that we need to build in order to support that, and the opportunities that come with building out our grid that way. We're going to be talking a lot about the importance of shared and active transport, and particularly as the federal government moves to map out what the plan for transport looks like past the introduction of fuel efficiency standards, which you would know we've done a lot on. We'll really be trying to centre mode shift in that conversation at all levels of government. And then we'll be doing a lot around socialising and explaining why we don't need any more gas in Australia. people would have seen from my presentation, there's a lot of places across our plan where we can slash the amount of gas that we are using right now and move as quickly as possible towards phasing it out. And so we really need to tell that story. We need to help everybody, politicians, communities, industry, decision makers, understand that we don't need new gas. And so we can stop approving it and we can start phasing it down alongside coal. And so those are some of our biggest priorities in an advocacy sense. And as we start moving into the next federal election period, we'll be really going hard on policies and promises from governments and all parties, because we want to make sure that this is something that everybody is leaning into across the parliament. Those are the sorts of things that we're going to be advocating very strongly for.
Thank you, Jen. We're coming to the end of the webinar now. We've just got a few minutes left. So I wanted to go to each of our panelists and ask them, what in this report are you most excited about? What do you think it can do for Australia? Tim, let's go to you first.
The thing that I'm most excited by, though, is that it's a plan, and what it does is it empowers people to take those actions in their own lives and in their own kind of circle of friends, their community, to get us on track so that we can hit the target that the science says we need to hit, which is a much more ambitious target than what we're currently aiming at amongst kind of various government targets. So to get somewhere into the future, you need a plan, and this is a plan. It's a detailed plan. And the benefits of adopting this plan is that it becomes a lot less us and them, and it just becomes us. The reality is by electrifying, by building out low-cost renewables, you can effectively see regional communities benefit by re-engaging some of those economic benefits from consuming that electricity closer to where it's produced. And so I often kind of say that the Park Shire Council gives one of the best presentations I've ever seen on the benefits of electrification and renewables, because they talk about the value add within a community that comes from doing things that use electricity. And the best example they give is, at the moment, lots of wheat goes out of that particular local government area, that if they turn it into muesli bars, the extra economic benefit to the community is something like 1,000% or 10,000%. Electrification, because all of the renewable resources are largely located in regional areas, could provide this enormous benefit for regional Australia. And it's really important that everybody works together to try and enable that benefit. So I guess kind of for me, the plan is optimism. It's all about what can we all do in our own lives? What can we advocate for? What can we work with leaders, whether they be political or business, to try and achieve? Because if we all lean into this and get it right, the benefits are not just environmental, they're also economic. And it's a great outcome if we can not only save the planet, but we can help households in a cost of living crisis reduce how much they're spending on things like energy. So to me, it's all positive. We've just got to lean into it now and get on with it.
Thanks, Tim. And briefly, Dinah?
Well, Tim, you stole my answer, telling a positive story. No, just kidding. I think the other thing that really excites me about this plan is we can transform the way we get around. And I don't think enough of us perhaps have really given thought to what that actually means and what that might look like. And so I think what excites me is the potential that's there in the transport sector to do so much more than we are. And the second thing is that there's so many instant benefits for us, for our health, for our well-being, for the way that our streets are safe and secure and our communities are really livable. So I think that's the one that gets me excited.
Thanks, Dinah. Jen?
I'm just so excited about the jobs that I can see across this plan. I've got a son who's just started high school, and I love the idea that as he grows up, the opportunities that he's going to have to look right across our economy and find a clean energy or a clean industry job that really excites him, that offers him a great career through his whole life and gives him the opportunity to be part of this enormous renewal of our community and of our economy. So I see jobs everywhere in this report, and I'm just so pumped about that.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic that this is actually not just about solving the climate crisis, which of course it fundamentally is, but it's also about how do we build a thriving 21st century economy. So thank you, Jen. Thank you, Dinah. Thank you, Tim. Thank you, everyone who's been online with us. The conversation's been really engaging. The questions have been fantastic. So I hope you're feeling like you've got a bit of hope and optimism going away, and you're going to share the report with everyone, including those decision makers in your orbit, your federal member, your local, state, And the thing that I come away with is what we do now matters. Humanity can achieve great things. There's that classic phrase from Margaret Mead that never underestimate a small group of people to change the world. It's all that ever has. And increasingly, this is not a small group. We're a bigger and bigger group of people that are trying to change the world. But the biggest obstacle to succeeding is that humanity doesn't understand just how important it is and just how possible it is to solve. So if we can get out there and tell everyone just how necessary this is and just how possible it is, hopefully we can turn things around, and things are turning, and we can make it happen. So thank you for making our work possible, and each of every one of you for everything that you do. You'll receive an email shortly giving you the access to the report, the recording of today's events, and other resources that were in the chat. And stay in touch, and hopefully we'll speak to you soon. See you later.